In the 2006 film 300, Xerxes is portrayed as a towering, androgynous god-king, dripping in gold chains and piercings, speaking in a deep, distorted voice, promising Leonidas godhood if he kneels. He's visually striking, clearly meant to be alien and threatening. The embodiment of Eastern excess and decadence versus Spartan masculinity and discipline. It's one of cinema's most memorable villain designs. It's also complete fantasy that tells us nothing about the real Xerxes I of Persia. But here's what's disturbing. The real Xerxes was actually far more terrifying than the movie version. Not because he was a magical god-king or a monster, but because he was a competent, ruthless emperor commanding the largest empire the world had ever seen, with the resources and will to crush anyone who opposed him. The movie makes Xerxes into a cartoon supervillain. The reality was a sophisticated, calculating ruler who came terrifyingly close to conquering Greece and ending Western civilization as we know it. He wasn't a bizarre god-king demanding worship, he was a pragmatic imperialist executing a military campaign with overwhelming force. And what he did to people who resisted him, the calculated cruelty he employed, and the sheer scale of violence he commanded makes the movie's depiction look tame by comparison. Today we're breaking down what 300 got wrong about Xerxes, who he really was, and why the truth is so much more disturbing than Hollywood's fantasy. Let's get into it. Xerxes I ruled the Achaemenid Persian Empire from 486 to 465 BCE. When he inherited the throne from his father Darius I, he controlled the largest empire in the world, stretching from Egypt to India, from the Persian Gulf to the Black Sea. Roughly 50 million people lived under Persian rule, about 44% of the entire world's population at the time. Let that sink in. Xerxes ruled nearly half of all humans alive. The resources, manpower, and wealth at his disposal were almost incomprehensible. But the movie shows none of this context. Movie Xerxes is just the bad guy from the East, without any sense of what Persian imperial power actually meant. The real Xerxes was born into royalty as a grandson of Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire. He was educated in administration, military strategy, languages, and statecraft. He wasn't some mystical figure, he was a trained ruler raised from birth to command an empire. Contemporary sources describe Xerxes as tall and handsome by Persian standards, which is completely at odds with the film's grotesque depiction. Persian royal inscriptions and Greek historians mention his physical stature and bearing. He looked like a king, not a monster. Xerxes was also deeply religious in the Zoroastrian tradition. He built temples, supported priests, and saw himself as ruling by divine mandate from Ahura Mazda, the chief god of Zoroastrianism. His religious devotion was genuine, not the capricious god complex the film depicts. He was multilingual, speaking Old Persian, Aramaic, and possibly Elamite and Babylonian. He understood administration, logistics, engineering, and military science. This was a sophisticated, educated ruler managing a complex multi-ethnic empire, not a decadent god-king obsessed with personal glory. When Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BCE, he wasn't doing it because he was crazy or evil. He was finishing what his father started, punishing Athens and Eretria for supporting rebellions in Persian territories and bringing the troublesome Greek city-states under Persian control. From his perspective, this was entirely rational. Small states on his empire's periphery were causing problems and needed to be integrated or destroyed. The movie shows the Persian army as vast, but doesn't really convey what vast meant. It also doesn't explain the logistics, which is where the real terror lies. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, claimed Xerxes invaded with 2.6 million soldiers, plus an equivalent number of support personnel, totaling over 5 million people. Modern historians consider this impossibly high. You physically couldn't feed and move that many people with ancient logistics. Current estimates put the Persian invasion force at 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers, plus support personnel. But here's the thing. Even 200,000 soldiers was an army unlike anything Greece had ever seen. For scale, the entire Spartan citizen soldier class numbered around 8,000 men. Athens could field maybe 10,000 hoplites. The combined Greek forces at Thermopylae numbered about 7,000. Xerxes was bringing an army 30 times larger than the total force defending Thermopylae. The disparity was staggering. And this wasn't just soldiers. Xerxes brought engineers who built 2 pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, modern Dardanelles, each over a mile long. When storms destroyed the first bridges, Xerxes had the Hellespont whipped 300 times and chains thrown into it as punishment. A symbolic act showing his absolute authority extended even to nature itself. New bridges were built. He brought a fleet of over 1,000 warships from across his empire. He had supply ships, transport ships, and a logistics train that could sustain hundreds of thousands of people crossing hostile territory. He had engineers dig a canal through the Athos Peninsula to avoid sailing around a dangerous cape where Persian ships had previously wrecked. This wasn't just engineering, it was a demonstration of power. I will reshape geography itself to suit my invasion. The Persian army included contingents from across the empire: Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Indians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, and dozens of other peoples. This was a multi-ethnic imperial war machine that represented half the known world. And Xerxes commanded it personally. He wasn't sitting in Persia sending orders, he marched with his army, watching battles from elevated platforms, making strategic decisions in real time. The movie reduces this to big army attacks, small army. The reality was an empire mobilizing resources on a scale Greece couldn't comprehend. Commanded by a ruler with more power than any European would see again until the Roman Empire at its height. The movie presents Xerxes as cruel in abstract ways. He demands submission, he threatens violence, his army is brutal. But the real Xerxes' documented acts of cruelty are specific and horrifying. The Babylonian Rebellion. Early in Xerxes' reign, Babylon rebelled against Persian rule. Xerxes crushed the rebellion and then systematically dismantled Babylon's status. He melted down the golden statue of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, which had stood for centuries. This wasn't just theft, it was religious annihilation. The statue's destruction meant Babylon's gods had been defeated. He couldn't be crowned king of Babylon without that statue, so he just took the title anyway and ruled through pure force. He executed the rebel leaders, of course, but he also razed sections of the city, destroyed temples, and deported populations. Babylon, which had been a cultural and religious center for millennia, was reduced to just another Persian provincial city. Leonidas's body. After Thermopylae, Xerxes had Leonidas's body decapitated and crucified. The head was displayed. This was unusual even by ancient standards. Greek custom was to return enemy dead for proper burial. Xerxes specifically wanted to humiliate Sparta's king, even in death. Greek cities that resisted. When Greek cities surrendered, Xerxes could be merciful. He'd install pro-Persian governments and move on. But cities that resisted and were then captured faced systematic destruction. Buildings were burned. Populations were enslaved or massacred. Athens itself was burned after being evacuated. Temples on the Acropolis were deliberately destroyed. Pythius the Lydian. This is one of the most disturbing stories. Pythius was a wealthy Persian subject who had funded and supported Xerxes' invasion. He was so loyal that when the army passed through his territory, he offered to pay for the entire army's provisions. Xerxes declined but was impressed. Pythius had 5 sons, all serving in the invasion force. When the expedition faced bad omens, Pythius nervously asked if perhaps his eldest son could be excused from service to care for him in old age. Xerxes was offended that Pythius would even ask, after Xerxes had shown him such favor. So Xerxes had the eldest son killed, cut his body in half, and had the army march between the 2 halves as they left Lydia. This wasn't battlefield execution or punishment for rebellion. This was calculated cruelty to demonstrate that questioning the king's will, even politely, even from a loyal supporter, was unacceptable. The reality of imperial violence. These aren't exceptional cases. This was how empires worked. Xerxes was neither unusually cruel nor unusually merciful by ancient standards. But the specific documented cases show a ruler who used terror, humiliation, and extreme violence as tools of statecraft. The movie Xerxes talks about power and makes vague threats. The real Xerxes cut loyal supporters' sons in half to make a point. Movie Xerxes presents himself as a god-king, demanding worship. This is based on a misunderstanding of Persian royal ideology. The real Xerxes didn't claim to be a god. He claimed to rule by divine mandate from Ahura Mazda. This is a crucial distinction. He was divinely appointed, not divine himself. Persian royal inscriptions from Xerxes' reign repeatedly invoke Ahura Mazda's favor. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I am king. And similar phrases appear constantly. Xerxes saw himself as the earthly representative of divine order, fighting against chaos and lies. Drug in Old Persian, a concept central to Zoroastrian theology. When Greeks refused submission, Xerxes saw it not just as political rebellion, but as cosmic disorder. These small states were violating the natural order where the divinely appointed Persian king ruled the civilized world. Their resistance was almost heretical from his worldview. This made the conflict more intense than the movie depicts. Movie Xerxes wants submission for egotistical reasons. Real Xerxes saw Greek resistance as an affront to divine order itself. This was cosmic, not just political. The bridge whipping incident mentioned earlier reflects this. Modern audiences laugh at the absurdity of whipping the sea. But in Persian ideology, Xerxes' authority was so absolute that even nature should submit to it. The whipping was symbolic, a demonstration that Xerxes' will was supreme, and anything that opposed it, even storms, would be punished. It was theater designed to impress his own troops and intimidate enemies. The destruction of Greek temples had religious significance too. When Athens was burned, the Acropolis temples were deliberately targeted. This wasn't just destroying military infrastructure, it was demonstrating that Greek gods couldn't protect their worshippers. Persian divine order was supreme. This religious dimension makes Xerxes more dangerous than the movie version. Movie Xerxes is ego-driven. Real Xerxes had ideological certainty backed by divine mandate. He wasn't just conquering, he was imposing cosmic order. The movie presents Thermopylae as the turning point where Leonidas' sacrifice inspired Greece. Reality was more complex and more interesting. Thermopylae was a Persian tactical victory. Yes, the Greeks held for 3 days and killed many Persians. But Xerxes won. The Greeks retreated or died. The pass was taken. Xerxes proceeded into Greece. The real turning point was naval warfare at Salamis, followed by the land battle at Plataea the next year. At Salamis in September 480 BCE, the Persian fleet was lured into narrow straits where numbers didn't matter and Greek trireme tactics were superior. The Persian fleet was devastated. Xerxes, watching from shore, saw his naval power broken. This changed everything. Without naval superiority, Xerxes couldn't supply his massive land army in Greece. The logistics that had enabled the invasion collapsed. He had to withdraw the bulk of his forces back to Asia. He left Mardonius with a large force. Ancient sources say 300,000, modern estimates say maybe 100,000, to continue the campaign. But in 479 BCE at Plataea, this force was defeated in a pitched battle. Mardonius was killed. The Persians retreated. Why did Xerxes lose? Not because of Spartan heroism alone, though that mattered, but because logistics. Maintaining a huge army in hostile territory across a sea required naval dominance. Once the fleet was destroyed, the invasion became unsustainable. Greek unity. Usually Greek city-states fought each other. The Persian threat temporarily unified them into a defensive coalition. Xerxes was facing not just Sparta or Athens, but a combined Greek defensive effort. Naval expertise. Greeks were better sailors with better tactics. Their triremes were faster and more maneuverable. At Salamis, in confined waters, Greek naval advantage neutralized Persian numerical superiority. Terrain. Greece's mountains, narrow passes and coastlines favored defenders. The flat plains where Persian cavalry excelled were rare. Greeks fought on terrain they understood. Motivation. Greeks were defending their homes. Persians were far from home fighting for an empire. Morale matters. Xerxes didn't lose because he was a bad commander. He was competent. He lost because the logistical and tactical challenges of conquering Greece proved too great even for the world's largest empire. The movie ends with Thermopylae and a hint at future Greek victories. But what happened to Xerxes? He returned to Persia after Salamis and lived another 15 years. The failed Greek invasion didn't destroy him politically. The Persian Empire was so vast that the Greek campaign was just one frontier war among many. Xerxes continued ruling, building projects, managing the empire. He completed massive construction projects at Persepolis, the Persian ceremonial capital, the ruins you can visit today in Iran, the grand staircases, the relief sculptures of tribute bearers from across the empire. Much of that was completed under Xerxes. He remained a powerful king. The failed Greek invasion was embarrassing, but not catastrophic. Persia was still the superpower. Greece was still divided and fighting internally. Life went on. In 465 BCE, Xerxes was assassinated, killed by Artabanus, the commander of his royal guard, as part of a palace conspiracy. The details are murky and disputed, but it appears to have been internal power politics, not related to the Greek wars. His son Artaxerxes I succeeded him and ruled for another 40 years. The dynasty continued. The empire continued. Persian power continued. This is what the movie obscures. Thermopylae and Salamis were defeats, but they weren't the end of Persian power. Greece remained under Persian threat for generations. Many Greek city-states became Persian vassals. The Persian Empire lasted another 150 years until Alexander the Great conquered it. Xerxes wasn't defeated the way the movie implies. He fought a campaign, lost some battles, withdrew strategically, and returned to ruling half the world's population. He was assassinated by his own people in palace politics, not defeated by Greek heroes. The reality is less cinematically satisfying, but more historically important. Persia was so powerful that losing in Greece barely mattered to their overall imperial position. 300's depiction of Xerxes is soaked in Orientalist stereotypes. Xerxes is portrayed as sexually ambiguous and androgynous, decadent and covered in jewelry, Eastern excess, demanding worship, Eastern despotism, leading hordes of foreign monsters, Eastern hordes, lacking the masculine discipline of Greeks. The real Xerxes was a Persian emperor who looked and acted like other ancient rulers. He wasn't particularly decadent. Persian royal culture valued different aesthetics than Greek culture, but that doesn't make it decadent. He didn't demand worship as a god. He claimed divine mandate, which was standard for ancient monarchs, including many Greek tyrants. He wasn't sexually ambiguous. He had a wife and a harem and multiple children. The movie's sexualization of him says more about 2006 American anxieties than about Persian culture. The pierced, towering, deep-voiced god king is a fantasy villain constructed from Orientalist tropes, not a historical figure. Frank Miller's graphic novel, which the film adapts, and the movie both lean heavily into these stereotypes. Greek sources like Herodotus do describe Xerxes negatively. He's portrayed as arrogant and temperamental, but Greek sources were propaganda written by enemies. They're not neutral. Modern historians recognize this bias and try to understand Persian perspectives from Persian sources. 300 doesn't just use Greek bias, it amplifies it with modern stereotypes about the Middle East. The result is a villain that tells us nothing about historical Persia. So why is the real Xerxes more disturbing than the movie version? Scale of power. Movie Xerxes has a big army. Real Xerxes controlled half the world's population. The resources at his disposal, wealth, manpower, technology, were greater than anything Greece could imagine. That level of concentrated power in one person's hands is genuinely terrifying. Rationality. Movie Xerxes is an irrational god-king seeking worship. Real Xerxes was rational, calculating, and pragmatic. He was smart. He planned carefully. He used overwhelming force strategically. A rational, competent enemy is far scarier than a crazy one. Systematic cruelty. Movie Xerxes is vaguely threatening. Real Xerxes cut people in half, melted sacred statues, burned cities, and enslaved populations as calculated policy. The specific documented cruelties show someone who used terror as a tool of statecraft. Not emotional violence, but calculated intimidation. He nearly won. Movie Xerxes is clearly going to lose because he's the villain. Real Xerxes came terrifyingly close to conquering Greece. If the Persian fleet hadn't been drawn into the straits at Salamis, if Xerxes' logistics had held, Greece might have fallen. Western philosophy, democracy, theatre, all the Greek cultural achievements that influenced Western civilization might never have happened. That's genuinely frightening. He represented something bigger. Movie Xerxes is a bad individual. Real Xerxes represented imperial power that would dominate the region for another 150 years. He wasn't an aberration, he was the system. Persian imperial power was so vast that even major defeats didn't significantly weaken it. The fantasy Xerxes is a monster you can kill, and the problem is solved. The real Xerxes was a competent ruler of a superpower that couldn't be stopped by individual heroism, only by strategic advantages, superior tactics, and significant luck. That's far more disturbing because it's real. Fantasy villains can be defeated by heroes. Historical superpowers require systemic responses and sometimes survive even major defeats. 300 gave us a visually striking villain who has become iconic in pop culture. Xerxes, as portrayed by Rodrigo Santoro, is memorable, quotable, and dramatically effective. But he bears almost no resemblance to Xerxes I of Persia, the ruler of the largest empire in the world, commanding resources and power almost incomprehensible to the Greeks he fought. The real Xerxes was educated, competent, ruthless, and came terrifyingly close to conquering Greece and ending Western civilization as we know it. He cut loyal supporters' sons in half to make points about obedience. He melted sacred statues and burned cities as policy. He commanded half the world's population and mobilized them for conquest. And after failing in Greece, he went back to ruling that empire for another 15 years before being assassinated in palace politics. The Greek campaign was a setback, not a defeat. He remained a powerful king until his death. The truth is so much worse than the movie because it's not fantasy. It's history. This actually happened. A ruler with this much power, this much ruthlessness, and this much competence actually invaded Europe and nearly succeeded. 300 turned Xerxes into a monster. The real Xerxes was a man, which is far more disturbing. Because men with that much power are real and recurring throughout history. Fantasy villains we can dismiss. Historical lessons about unchecked imperial power and systematic cruelty we ignore at our peril. If you found this historical breakdown compelling, let me know what other historical figures have been completely distorted by Hollywood. And if you'll never see Xerxes the same way again, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Remember, the scariest villains are the real ones.